What up, homies? What up, fans? This is the other Paul. I hope you are having a blessed day. Today is the Lord's Day here in Australia. So, for any other people in my half of the planet, may you have a blessed Lord's Day. I hope you're going to church today. I know I am. Thank you, Lord. And yes, today is, as the title says, going to be a quote unquote brief response to Trent Horn and Joe Heschmeyer's very recent video on early ecclesiology, specifically on whether there was an early bishop of Rome in the first century, whether there was an original bishop of Rome in the first century, single bishop, and the issue of the monepiscopacy in general. And I'll say off the bat, one thing I do quite like about the simple existence of this video is that it's a very convenient coalescing, I guess, of the modern Roman Catholic apologetic on this topic. So it's only half an hour long, so it's not like the most in-depth treatments you can get, but they do give their more serious assertions and claims and so on. So it's a very useful foil to interact with to see the state of where the Catholic apologetic is. What are they positing today? And of course, as a sober scholar man myself, although of course I will say, yes, I would describe myself as an apologist. I believe that anyone who engaged in an apologetic endeavor for which or whatever belief or ideology is an apologist, at least at that moment. So I will say that, but I also like to consider myself primarily a sober scholar. So it's not going to be a case of, oh, I'm here debunking Catholics, Roman Catholics debunked. No, that's not the case. It's a matter of history. It's a matter of scholarship. So that's what I'm here for. I'm here to analyze claims and all that stuff. And good to see you guys here. Justas, too many gaps in their claims. I agree, and we will get to that. And yes, Craig, good to see you. I agree with you. Joe is a very good guy. I like both Joe and Trent. They're very good. They're very sharp men. Although I believe the mistakes in the evidence and in their reasoning, to respectfully put it, of course, is really well shown in this video. I think we're going to see some very interesting claims that we can take a look at, just from a soberly historical perspective, because I believe that, look, this isn't even an issue that matters to Protestant belief. If there was an early single bishop of every single church in the beginning from the apostles, whoop-de-doo, whatever. It doesn't mean nothing to whatever for us. So it's more than easy for me to just go the sober scholarly route, as I always try to do, but I don't confuse that with a false neutrality. Everyone has ideology, presuppositions, and all that. So I'm very open with that, but I deal with the evidence honestly, as everyone should. As a good girl should. Jeff, excellent to see you here, down for this. Awesome. Kudos to admitting what Catholic scholars believe. For them, yes, that is true. They do admit that. I think it will be a good direction for them, because it'll start to push some Catholic apologetics away from, oh well, scholars say this and scholars say that. And sorry, Swan, but I highly dispute that method. It doesn't deal with the evidence in and of itself. It doesn't matter what scholars say. So it's good that they're taking that approach. It was effective while it lasted, that move. They're starting to counteract it by simply saying, well, those Catholic scholars are wrong. So, and that's good. That's a good thing epistemologically. So yes, really quickly, I'm going to say that I am live on my Discord, live now. All right, awesome. People should be able to be pouring in. We've got 5 people now. This is very nice. I hope people come and tune in from Facebook. Some reason live viewers doesn't show Twitter, even though I casted there. But my stream yesterday with Craig did show up at least after the fact on my Twitter. I don't know if anyone can see my Twitter and if this thing is happening there live or not, because if not, it might just be a dumb thing where it just posted after the fact, which is kind of retarded if that's the case. But Pog, mate, good to see you here. I hope you're gonna have a great day here with us, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all have snacks or some tea or whatever, because it's gonna be a good one. And so here we have the video in question that we will be reviewing. Ooh, His Excellency Karl Marx. Hail, Karl Marx. How are you? The great Yoshi himself on the papal throne. Thank you very much for coming. Look, right now, I personally accept the primacy, the papal claims of Pope Michael right now. But if you can make a better case than him, then hey, I'm all ears, mate. I'm all ears. I want to go for the truth. I have no idea what the long M word means, but sounds exciting. Long M word. M word. What's the M word? Oh, Marxcellency. Yeah, his name's Marx, as in Marks. So he's a Marxcellency, of excellency. Get it? Pun. Epic pun. So, gents, very happy to see you all here. We are going to have a very fun time. And to show how prepared I am for today, well, for one, most of this stuff, I didn't really make any specific notes for this, but because I'm kind of happy with how much I've studied this stuff, this specific early church, first, second century evidence. I'm pretty happy with what I do. So I've got some epic sources here. We got, ladies and gentlemen, boom, the Apostolic Fathers. All right, Greek and English texts. The best of the best. So this is going to include the relevant texts like First Clement and the epistles of Ignatius, particularly that of the Magnesians, which I need to open back up to because I had it open, but then it just closed on me. And where are you, mate? Where are you? There you are. Sweet, perfect. And Ignatius is, of course, a very big poster boy, if you will, for the Monepiscopacy. Oh, you meant Monepiscopacy. I'm a retard. I'm sorry. I thought everyone just it's not good to just assume people know all your terms, which I know better than that because I like to pride myself in that as a teacher. But yes. No, I meant monoepiscopacy, however you spell it. Yeah, so monoepiscopacy, basically just the idea of a single bishop over a jurisdiction. Yeah, that's it, over a jurisdiction and or a congregation, or there's distinctions. Greek, that's no good. Oh no, we can't do the early languages. Please, I need my translation. Translation cucks. Learn Greek. that's the theological version of learn to code. But yes, we got that, the Apostolic Fathers. We got wabam, Irenaeus against heresies. I don't know if we'll be using that much or at all, but if they, because I don't remember if they do cite them on this, but if they do, then yeah, okay, cool. And of course, Eusebius's ecclesiastical history. And I'm only showing this to you guys to flex, to kind of flex that, hey, I've got all my sources here, my historical primary sources. So should those claims come up, I don't remember every single thing they bring up. The most that they go with is primarily Ignatius. But yes, that's what we'll be doing. And I don't intend to really fact check a lot of, per se, the quotes that they give. Like, for the most part, they're fine with that, if I remember. But it's the reasoning they employ and what they take from those quotes. So yeah, so that's going to be the main issues I'm going to have with their reasoning here. But yes, I think no more dilly-dallying. We shall begin.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic apologist and speaker Trent Horn. Fancy digs today. We are in the Catholic Answers studio. I get to sit in a comfy chair. I got a nice boom mic here.
I do want a nice studio like that one day.
Mr. Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, welcome to the program. Thanks for having me on. It feels a lot like being at work. Right. This is where we are. Now, I'm a little bit jealous of you because you have got...
Actually, yeah, I think they have a bit of an intro here, so I'll just skip it. Oh, and do tell me if the volumes are a bit weird, like if one's too quiet or one's too loud and all that. So yeah, please do hit me up if that's the case.
Hey, I'm going to be in the studio tomorrow. Let's talk. And I just want to talk about whatever you're just jazzed about. Something you're just really excited to talk about. And I just got an advanced copy of your new book.
Video is very quiet compared to my voice. Okay, yep, we'll do.
Mm-hmm. And the book has a wonderful,
is that good?
Self-explanatory title. The early church was the
so just the
Catholic
earlobe
Church.
Gets itchy.
It's a mystery. What could this book be about? What the thesis of the book?
I have got that book right here. I am starting a somewhat review series on this book. I started with some initial comments on my blogger, which is only temporary, by the way. I'm intending on upgrading the site to a proper, more professional thing, ideally with Wix. And yeah, it's an interesting book. I'm very surprised how he almost doesn't touch at all on the issue of the papacy, which is like really the central thing to demonstrate that the early church was the Catholic Church. It's really weird that way, especially because most of the other things he seeks to prove with the early church sources in that book are things, most of them, bar perhaps the sacrifice of the Mass, are things that can be accepted by the Orthodox, the Anglicans, or well, the Orthodox can definitely accept the sacrifice, but the obedience to your bishop, submission to your bishop, and the real presence, of course, and the baptismal regeneration. These are all things that Orthodox and even many other Protestant churches can accept. So even if he was totally bang on with like the vast majority of his arguments in that book, it wouldn't say the early church is the Catholic Church. Again, bar perhaps the sacrifice of the Mass, which even then, if I'm not mistaken, Craig, you can maybe fact check me on this, but I believe the Orthodox affirm that as well, do they not? And I think I remember the Lutherans, the Lutherans and Luther, I think in particular, they had qualms with that conception of the sacrifice of the Mass, but I don't think they object to the term per se. I think Lutherans, and the Anglicans, if I remember correctly, do believe that the Eucharist is some kind of a representation of a sacrifice, quote unquote, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not very well read in them, so if I totally butchered that, then please forgive me. And there we go. Craig says that, yes, he confirms my thing, and Lutherans reject. Okay, there you go. So, I mean, the book, if we accepted 100% of the book, we'd still have the question, okay, Catholic or Orthodox? So it's a bit misguided in that respect. The book would be totally fine if it included the papacy. That's kind of what it needs to do. So yeah, that's a bit of a tangent, but anyway, I've got a review series coming. I've got my opening remarks already on Blogger, so check it out if you haven't already.
So I love it that we have something, because a lot of people, including many Protestants, are more interested in learning about Christian history. I think many people find their way into the Catholic Church. This happened for me, that I looked at all the Christian denominations and thought, all right, well, what did the first Christians believe? What did they believe? I would like to be close to what they believe. And so there are many more Protestants who are interested in that. It leads them to Catholicism. And I think there are Protestant apologists who step forward and say, oh, wait, not so fast. The early church is not the Catholic Church we might think of. And one of the arguments that they raise, it relates to the papacy. They might say, okay, you'll find some similarities here, but when you think Catholic, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? The Pope, right? Like Catholic, Pope.
Which is ironic because Joe doesn't deal with that like almost at all in that book. I've read through it, so I mean, yeah.
But then they'll say, look, when you go back into the early church, you go back to the first century, they'll say, well, there wasn't a pope. We don't see anyone talking about a...
He does deal with that issue of whether there was a bishop in Rome in the first century. So, but even then, again, anyone of any denomination can accept that historical claim.
First century bishop of Rome. So, and this is a thesis that is common, not just among some Protestant apologists, but even among some Catholic scholars.
Yeah, Father Eamon Duffy, who's a very well-respected medieval Catholic scholar. There are J.P. Meyer, Raymond Brown, plenty of Catholic scholars who claim that there was not a pope in the first and second century, or first and up to the early second, but that there wasn't even a bishop of Rome at all. Not even a debate about what was his authority, what was his jurisdiction, but just he didn't exist, is their claim, which is a really radical claim.
Right, so that there was just a council of priests who was overseeing the Church of Rome, and then the office of bishop emerged slowly after that, with the office of the papacy emerging even further after that, which would make one doubt whether the papacy is even a part of the deposit of faith at all. So that is what I want to talk about today, this idea that in academic terms, we would say the debate over the mono-episcopacy. Was the early church, and I think many Protestants...
I call it the monepiscopacy, and I think that was just brainwashing by autocorrect on various services, because it's always corrected to mono-episcopacy, which actually does make a lot more sense. The mono-episcopacy is a bit of an awkward diphthong. It doesn't even become a diphthong. It's just an awkward transition from one vowel to another. Not super awkward, but like monopiscopacy is smoother. It's a better elision. Well, not really an elision, just a drop off of the last vowel of mono. So yeah.
Protestants have tried to argue for this.
Excuse my autism.
Confederacy of believers, little house churches. Was there in every region or every city where there's a church, was there a single bishop presiding over the church in that region? Number one. And then number two, was that the case for the church in Rome? Because as Catholics, it's not just any bishop that's most important, it's the bishop of Rome. Like, was there one in the first century? And I think my view would be very similar to yours. This is a issue that I've addressed before on the channel. It was actually something that I addressed in one of my previous videos. If you look online, I have a rebuttal to the strongest argument against Catholicism offered by a Protestant author, Jerry Walls.
Yes.
Yeah, that was very, very hyped. I mean, his argument isn't strictly incorrect, but it's just, I think even Cameron Bertuzzi admitted that he kind of just put in a clickbaity title for that. Even I don't think even Jerry did that.
And he went on Cameron Bertuzzi's podcast and he talked about this very issue. And so I went through that, offered a lot of insights. But you've done even more research on this than I have. So you're jazzed to talk about this. I'm jazzed to talk to you.
I mentioned Jerry Walls in this chapter. Like it's very much like in the common discourse right now among Protestants and among Catholics alike.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your basic thesis? And let's get people to understand that you'll have some Protestants, even some Catholic scholars saying, well, there wasn't really a single bishop of Rome. That emerged in a very delayed way that kind of accrued over time. And you're saying, no, that the office of the episcopate, the bishop, is something we can trace back to the New Testament. And it's something we can find continuity from the New Testament through the first century and the early second century.
Yeah, the positive case would look something like this: that the threefold structure, that there's one bishop accompanied by priests or presbyters.
Hold up. Let's hear that again. Did he say that's the biblical?
The positive case would look something like this: that the threefold structure, that there's one bishop accompanied by priests or presbyters.
I didn't say biblical strictly.
Is something that goes back to the time of the apostles, goes back to the apostles, goes back ultimately then to Christ. And that it was something that was viewed as an inheritance from Judaism. That Judaism has this three-tiered structure of high priest, priest, and Levite. And that very, very early on, we see these connections being made implicitly, but pretty obviously in First Clement's letter in 96 AD.
Earlier than that, see, I'm more trad than Joe. First Clement is written before the destruction of the temple. Facts. See my presentation on First Clement's ecclesiology. But this is a good stopping point anyway, because let's see this. So the exact threefold structure. Let's see that again.
Levite, and that Judaism has this three-tiered structure of high priest, priest, and Levite.
Okay, high priest, priest, and Levite. So, and he talks about.
And then very, very early on, we see these connections being made implicitly, but pretty obviously in First Clement's letter.
Okay, stop right there. First Clement's letter. So he believes that this is ends up being a proof. At least an illusion. I'm not going to misrepresent it. At least something pointing to a monepiscopacy. So actually, let me switch back to my stream. The screen will go blank only because the window's not selected. So yes, but so I can see the comments. But with First Clement, when he talks about the structure of the church with that three-tier thing, yes. So from Jacob come all priests and Levites who minister the word of God. From him comes blah, blah, blah. Because I know of that analogy by Clement himself, and I believe he mentions it in that very same chapter on the temple, as in like the chapter where he says the temple sacrifices are still being served. But we have seen Holy One, drunkenness, let's say the records happen. Why was our father Abraham? Not that one. Gosh, what was the chapter again? I'm blank. I think it's 37. I believe it's 36 or 37. Far out. This is awkward. This is very, very awkward. Now he commanded offerings both. Okay, not just anyway, brother. Yep. Okay, cool. So these things, therefore. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now he commanded the offerings and the services to be performed diligently and not to be done carelessly or in disorder, but at designated times and occasions, both where and by whom he wants them to be performed. He himself determined by his supreme will, so that all things being done devoutly according to his good pleasure may be acceptable to his will. Those, therefore, who make the blah, 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 blah. Okay, for to the high priest, the proper services have been given, and to the priest, the proper office has been assigned, and upon the Levites, the proper ministries have been imposed. The layman is bound by layman's rules. So, first thing to note is that even after this, he doesn't strictly apply this to the structure of the church. He simply doesn't do that. What he draws from this, he doesn't say thus as there's these three orders, likewise there's the bishop, presbyters, and deacons. He does pull something of it, but simply what he does pull from it is simply the principle of there is a good order to do things in the church. That order must be maintained, which is his ultimate argument against the schismatics in Corinth, who overthrew their otherwise good elders. So he does this principle here. the next chapter. Let each of you brothers give thanks to God with your own group, maintaining a good conscience, not overstepping the designated rule of his ministry, but acting with reverence. Not just anywhere, brothers, are the continual daily sacrifices offered. And this is where he talks about the temple sacrifices still happening, which is the proof that this was written before AD 70, or before destruction at least. Not just anywhere, brothers, are the continual daily sacrifices offered, but the free will offerings or the offerings for sin and trespasses, but only in Jerusalem. And even there, the offering is not made in any place, but in front of the sanctuary at the altar, the offering having been first inspected for blemishes by the high priest and previously mentioned ministers. Those, therefore, who do anything contrary to the duty imposed by his will receive death as the penalty. You see, brothers, as we have been considered worthy of great knowledge, so much more are we exposed to danger. Now I'm trying to find, because somewhere in here, somewhere in this book, I forget where, First Clement applies the high priest to Jesus directly. Somewhere either in this part or in a later part. You know what? I'm going to cheat. I'm going to Google this really quickly. Give me 1 second, people. First Clement, Jesus, high priest. Boom. Okay. Okay, yep, there we go. Yep, got it. Okay, yep. No, it's in chapter 36. Okay, so I must have missed it. Just missed it. Yep. So, in chapter 36, this is the way, dear friends, in which we found our salvation, namely Jesus Christ, the high priest of our offerings, the benefactor and helper of our weakness. Through him we look steadily into the heights of heaven. Through him we see, as in a mirror, his faultless and transcendent face. And this very clearly coheres with what he describes as the role of the high priest. Even then, the offering is not made. Well, yeah, that's basically what he says about the role of the high priest. Point being, for Clement, his use of the high priest is in respect to with respect to Jesus. And elsewhere, chapter 61 as well. I'm using the New Advent translation, so I'm cheating a bit here just because I did a word search. O thou who only has the power to do these things and more abundant good with us, we praise you through the high priest and guardian of our souls, Jesus Christ, through whom be glory and majesty to you now from generation to generation forevermore. Amen. And that's chapter 61 of First Clement. So that's important because this immediate starting evidence here it doesn't give the full picture. It is somewhat misleading to say that this is what Clement's doing, that just as there's high priests and Levites, likewise there's bishops, presbyters, and deacons. It's misleading because Clement does not directly apply that analogy to the structure of the church. He rather appeals to the order of that, how there is an order to this structure as applying to the church. So he's not applying the same order, the same three-tier, well, the loosely speaking, the same three-tier structure to the church, but merely the fact that there is a structured order through which there is proper procedure. That's the principle he's pulling from it. He's not analogizing this with bishops, presbyters / priests, and deacons, which is further refuted, by the way, that Clement very explicitly promotes a two-tier office. And I won't do that just yet because they have more to say. But yeah, that's that first point. He doesn't give you the full picture. Joe doesn't give you the full picture. For Clement, Jesus is the high priest. There's no indication that he considers a singular head bishop as the high priest, as analogous to the high priest, let alone even in a singular bishop. In fact, all the evidence in First Clement's against that, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, let's continue.
96 AD.
Actually, before we do, I'm going to look at some comments really quickly. Orthodox are not the audience, Protestants are. That's true, but it is very misleading otherwise. To do all these things which the Orthodox could grant, and the various different Orthodox are that, like Coptics and all that. But then to say that this proves the Catholic Church, that's highly misleading. Highly, highly misleading, in my opinion. Wonder how well Trent knew the scriptures there. The first is Christians believed in no private property and unconditional nonviolence, and were all adults or teenagers turned to Anabaptist. Yeah, good meme. That is a good meme. I hope you're not serious here. No private property. Okay, so when Paul thanked Priscilla, I think he thanked Priscilla, or simply mentioned that Priscilla hosted the church in her house. Were there demands that she requisition the house to the common plebs of the church? I don't think so. The only indication we have is that in the book of Acts, it mentions how the Christians shared everything they owned. That's it. That doesn't mean there was that's just what they did. It's not saying that no one had private property. And this was just the first small group of Christians, by the way. That doesn't mean that was the case for the wider groups. And it definitely was not the case, given that we have patrons mentioned in the scriptures. And of course, people whose houses are hosting their local churches. Now, no mention is made that they're giving up their houses. Those houses are still referred to as their houses. They're just hosting the church. I mean, yeah, no, ridiculous. No priests, very true, because presbyter and episcopos are conflated in First Clement, the Didache, and the New Testament. Excellent, good evidence. But also, but then they would be forced to argue that bishop and priests were essentially one and the same originally. That's the only way they could say that they were original priests. Did the quote-unquote first Christians know about the Trinity? Not in terms of Nicene language, they didn't, but I believe they did all recognize that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit were all God. Exactly how they understood that can be debated. Obviously, any ortho watchers would disagree, I think, but yeah. What did Linus do to prove he was the chief shepherd bishop of the church? No idea. We have like 0 accounts of his life, so yeah. Also, slaves. Yes, people did own slaves. And when Paul told, when Paul told whoever received his letter to Philemon, that's it, to Philemon, I believe, to release Onesimus, it wasn't on the grounds of Gurugar private property bad. It's because he's a fellow brother. And even at that, Paul doesn't object to owning slaves. He explicitly recognizes it as a legitimate, even if unideal thing. Modern Anabaptists argue from the Church of Jerusalem in particular. I think it'd be fair to say there was diversity in organization in the other church. Yeah, I'd agree. No, I agree. Well, I think I guess not diversity per se, although I guess it might depend on your interpretation of when Paul talks about prophets, apostles, teachers, evangelists, and all, whether they were simply different gifts or they were different offices. Joe Heschmeyer likes to think they're all gifts, or I think he just kind of asserts that. But I think it's pretty easy to grant that there was at least somewhat universally a basic 2-tier structure of bishop and, well, overseer. I prefer to say overseer because bishop is a loaded term today, and deacon or servant. And then maybe local variations here or there, but I believe that was an original structure promoted by the early church, because we see it in the book of Acts itself, where they establish deacons with the 7 deacons, because the apostles, while they're doing the Lord's work, they're not going to be able to go to people's tables and feed them. So yeah. Anyway, moving on.
More explicitly in the early 200s, in one of the ordination rites for a bishop, in which he's compared to the high priest, those kind of connections are on people's mind. And that this is something that was understood, as St. Ignatius of Antioch says. If you don't have this 3-tiered structure, you don't have the Catholic Church. You don't have a church. And
I would love to see where he says, if you do not have this 3-tier structure, you are not the church. I mean, I can tell what statements he's getting this from, and I think he references them a bit later, and I think he actually does reference them in his book. So maybe this will double as a semi-review of the book as well, to see where he gets this from. But Irenaeus does not put it in those words. It's a bit, it's understandable to interpret it somewhat in that way, but it's definitely not those words. And yeah. But I think I'm going to open up to that part of the book early, just in case. Once we see it. Oh, he does talk about Clement here. There we go. Definitely can't wait for that in the review series.
I think that this is huge. Like for me, I did another video a while back called "The Church Father That Protestants Fear the Most," and I asked you. I said, "Joe, take a guess." You said, "Oh, St. Ignatius of Antioch," because he's very, very early. We can date him to early second century, like 110, 107.
Yep.
So we're talking now within 1 to 2 generations of the crucifixion, within a generation of the apostles themselves, and what he discusses that. He's very clear that the authority structure within the church, it's not the Bible. No discussion about any kind of a fixed or closed scripture that serves as the authority.
Let me bring that because I missed that.
Of the apostles themselves. And what he discusses, that he's very clear that the authority structure within the church, it's not the Bible. No discussion about any kind of a fixed or closed canon of Scripture that serves as the authority.
Yeah, nothing on a magisterium either, cuz. Or a singular amorphous sacred tradition. Like what does that even bro? His letters have very specific purposes. I mean, I think the Catholic apologists know this is why Jeff, my mate Jeff, a Goy for Jesus, and I believe you're still watching, such an excellent point when he says that Catholic apologetics trips itself up, refutes itself up because they're very narrowly focused in their apologetic, and they don't realize that what they say in one area ends up contradicting what they say in another. So in this case, he's making naked appeals to very fruitless silence. And I'm not saying arguments from silence are bad. There are good criteria from it. This is not it, because Ignatius's letters are very specific in purpose in terms of church order, maintaining order and good Christian practice in the church as he's about to get martyred. I mean, bro, come on. And these are established Christian communities. Unless the problem actually arose of people not knowing what the scriptures were, you wouldn't exactly expect them to say, oh, by the way, this is the full canon list of scriptures while I'm talking about martyrdom for Christ because a man 2,000 years in the future on a digital electronic platform will require me to say this in order to have this proof. I mean, bro, come on. That's just... yeah, no. Oh, good to see you, Steve. How does Trent in this video account for multiple bishops in First Clement? I don't think he does. I don't think they address that. They'd probably just say, oh, it doesn't mention it explicitly anywhere. But I think the opening to First Clement and the total use of first person plural we, and the absolute lack of use of I think that's quite definitive, in my opinion, for plural Roman episcopacy. Sorry for getting here late, causing problems on Apocrypha Apocalypse with Machuda and Albrecht. Cheeky. I might check that out later. Clement mostly cites the Old Testament. Very true. Yeah. Why do Catholic Saint Church Fathers speak for the entire church? A good point, and not very often brought up. Because they're not everyone. The Church Fathers are not everyone specifically speaking. Just because even a handful of fathers say something doesn't therefore mean the majority of the church felt that. But in terms of historical investigation, the statements of extant written sources are our best evidences for what was believed. So yeah, it's something to definitely be recognized. It's definitely a presupposition to be recognized, but it's a pretty reasonable one. So yeah.
Rather, he says things like follow the bishop as Jesus follows the Father. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and you're right. I think it's
do nothing without the bishop. It's very strong kind of.
I want to say it's
language.
Magnesians, literally Magnesians, where he says that if you do not have bishop, priest, and deacon, you don't have a church.
Exactly.
That's not the Catholic. And he uses the phrase.
All right, let's take a look. Magnesians. Yeah. I closed it accidentally. Because I might have spoken prematurely. I have read it Magnesians before, but it's been a little bit. So maybe he did. So if he does actually say that unless you have bishop, presbyter, and deacon, you do not have the church, then I will absolutely retract that claim. I wish they would give a citation, though. I really, you know what? Let's cheat again. Let's go to New Advent. Why not? New bishop, priest, deacon, First Clement. No, not First Clement. Sorry, Ignatius, Magnesians. I don't even know why I looked up bishop, priest, deacon. Epistles to the Magnesians. Okay, so let's look up presbyter. So let's do the word search. Since I've had the privilege, most worthy bishop, through your worthy presbyters, Bassus and Apollonius. Yep. As I've known, even holy presbyters do not judge the manifest youthful appearance of their bishop as being themselves prudent in God, submitting to them, or rather not, but to the Father of Jesus Christ, the bishop of us all. Therefore, think that you should, after no hypocritical passion, obey your bishop in honor of him who has willed us, since he does not deceive the bishop that is visible. Blah 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 blah. Yep. And your persons mentions. I exhort you to study to do all things with the divine harmony, while your bishop presides in the place of God, and with your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the holy apostles, along with your deacons, who are most dear to me and are trusted with the ministry of Jesus Christ, who has who was with the Father before the beginning of time and in the end revealed. Do all then, imitating the same divine conduct, pay respect to one another, and let no one look upon his neighbor after the flesh, and continue to love each other. Let nothing exist among you that may divide you, but be united with your bishop, those that preside over you, and as a type of defense of the immortality. As therefore the Lord did nothing without the Father, being united to him, neither by himself nor by the apostles, so neither do anything without the bishop and the presbyters, neither endeavor that anything appear reasonable or proper to yourselves apart, but being come together in the same place, that there will be one prayer, one supplication, one mind, one hope, one yep. And hang on. Spiritual, compacted spiritual crown. Whoops, that was kind of, that's the, how you ever enjoy as much as subject to the bishop of the Lord Jesus Christ, even the holy. Okay, no, that's beginning. Okay. Study therefore to be established in the doctrines of the faith of the Lord of the apostles, that so in all things, whatever you do, may prosper in the flesh, spirit, in faith, love, joy, and in the Father and the Spirit, in the beginning, in the world, and the end, with your most admirable bishop, and with the well compacted spiritual crown, presbytery, and the deacons who are according to God. Be subject to the bishop, to one another, as Jesus Christ the Father, according to the flesh, and the apostles to Christ, to the Father and to the Spirit, that there may be a union both fleshly and spiritual. Okay. Okay, so I think we can see the most likely place where they get this from. That if you don't have bishop, priests, and deacons, would be chapters 6 and 7, which are most emphatic here. And I believe the immediate problem with this, whatchamacallit, meaning that the big problem with making this assertion, okay, there's a difference between saying obey your bishop, presbyters, and deacons versus unless you have bishops, presbyters, and deacons, you don't have the Catholic Church. These are actually wildly different claims, okay? What Ignatius' statement here is doing is that it actually assumes, it's not even addressing the existence or non-existence of that three-tier structure and why there should be a three-tier structure. He is assuming the existence of the three-tier structure with the Magnesian Christians and saying, you must obey those and submit to them, and he draws typologies between them, as you can do. It's a nice typology to do. Now, why this matters, this difference matters, is that this is not Ignatius saying that this structure must be like this. It is simply saying, assuming this structure is the case, as he assumes it to be the case with the Magnesians, you must submit to these leaders. So this where the difference really comes into play is that hypothetically Ignatius could encounter a church that is a true plural episcopacy. There is no distinction between episcopoi and presbyteroi, or overseers and presbyters, and they're one and the same, and it's a plural episcopacy over the region, total equality between them all, and then there's the deacons, of course. None of that would contradict Ignatius' argument here, because he's actually not addressing the ideal structure of the church, but simply assuming that structure with the Magnesians and with others in other letters and saying, obey them. He would simply transplant this argument to the presbyters and perhaps change up the typology just a little bit, but the difference, a plural episcopacy wouldn't actually contradict his argument here, because this isn't actually making an exclusive case for a monepiscopacy. So it's somewhat misleading. It's very misleading to say that Ignatius's argument is, unless you have this three-tier structure, you do not have the church. That is highly, highly misleading. And I think that's really all I need to say about it. I don't want to ramble more than I have to. Steve, you got to go. Well, glad you're here, mate. Hope you'll enjoy if you watch the replay. Yep. So anyway, I believe I've said enough on that, and I guess we can continue.
The Catholic Church. Now, to pardon going back, we said about the New Testament, though. How
did they just do a word concept fallacy?
Exactly. That's one kind of.
I want to say it's Magnesians, literally Magnesians, where he says that if you do not have bishop, priest, and deacon, you don't have a church.
False.
That's
Straight up false.
The Catholic, and he uses the phrase the Catholic Church.
Oh, let's see where he uses that. If it's actually in that, if it's actually in, interesting. It should be in. That's interesting. So it doesn't appear. I don't think he uses Catholic in Magnesians. Uh-oh.
Now, to pardon going back, we said about the New Testament, though. How would you look at the idea that, and this is something, the view that I've always held, is that it seems in the New Testament that the offices of bishop, priest, and deacon can seem somewhat interchangeable. and how the terms are applied. Like Paul,
not deacon. No, it's very explicitly distinguished from the elders, for example, where like in the book of Acts, when they explicitly, the apostles establish, well, there's the apostles and the elders, and then they say, well, okay, well, the apostles say, well, we can't do all this administrative work. We need people to do that for us. And so they establish the 7 deacons. And likewise, Paul's letters are most abundantly clear in the distinction between episkopos and diakonos, or overseer and deacon. So deacon's not interchangeable. That's very clearly distinct. Yes, there are uses of deacon in a generic sense, like with Paul calling himself a diakonos theou, or a deacon of, or servant of God, or diakonos Christou, or servant of Christ. And likewise, the question of what did it mean by Paul calling Phoebe a servant or a deacon of the church at Cenchrea, which is in Corinth? So there's questions about that, where people who don't believe in any female diaconate are forced to say that this refers to a generic servant, not a deacon per se, which I would grant to. So yes, there are distinct uses, but it's very clear and easy to see in the scriptures which ones are generic uses and which ones are the uses of the deacon office. Definitely not the case with overseer and presbyter. They are so, when in the same ecclesial context with respect to office, they clearly refer to the same thing. And that's why I refer back to my theory in my first Clement video, where presbyter, even used in ecclesial context, is not a term of an office per se, but the descriptor of those men who are overseers. It's simply that they are literally elders. They are literally the old men. And they are interchanged in that context. So, yeah, no.
Refers to himself with the title as a deacon. Yes. Peter refers to himself as a fellow priest. That bishop,
a fellow elder. Hang on, Freudian slip. Okay, Trent appears to affirm that presbyter refers to priest. Oh dear. Okay.
Greek episkopoi, overseer.
Episkopos, singular.
Priest, that if you're reading in the New Testament letters, this is where the title elder might be found, is the Greek word presbyteroi, the presbyteroi. And then the diakono is where we get the word deacon. Right. So deacon, priest, bishop, or diakonoi, presbyteroi, episkopoi. It seems like in the time of
that's all plurals. So yeah.
These are at least much more interchangeable than by the time of Ignatius.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Partly because terminologically they're kind of being set still.
So the other Paul, did you see my comment? It's in Epistle Trallians chapter 3. Okay, let's take a look at it. Let's look at Trallians chapter 3. I believe it's right after Magnesians. Trallians chapter 3. Okay. Similarly, everyone respect the deacons as Jesus Christ, just as they should respect the bishop, who is the model of the Father, and the presbyters as God's council and as the band of the apostles. Without these, no group can be called a church. Okay. Yes. I am sure that you agree with me regarding these matters. Okay. I thought they were talking about Magnesians. Okay. So it is in Trallians. I believe they made a bit of an error there. Okay, yes. Without these, no group can be called a church. There you go. So, yeah, that's right. Ignatius does say that. I thought they were appealing to Magnesians. If they weren't, and I misread that, mea culpa, my apologies, live on air retraction. That's what a good scholar should do. So, yes, Ignatius does say that, and Ignatius is wrong because the first century evidence is quite explicit that there wasn't 3 tiers. So, Ignatius' argument is, well, in my opinion, I wouldn't say arrogant because it's not really a selfish motivation per se, but very naive. I'd say very naive.
In the same way that, there was an incident when President Biden was vice president, he presided at a gay marriage. And in English, saying the vice president presided, we had no trouble with that.
Right.
But someone reading that in translation is going to be very confused. Like, well, how could the vice president be the one presiding?
Because if you read it literally, it would be the vice presider was the main presider.
Exactly.
They would trip over themselves.
And so with this in Greek, you have overseer, elder, servant. Those are what bishop, priest, deacon, or bishop, presbyter, deacon mean. And so people are confused.
Good fix by Joe.
Because the Greek sometimes is being used in an official, technical, more specific context, but more often is used in a much looser context. So to give you an example, if you look at do a word study on diakonoi, of servant or servants
that we call deacon today.
Oh crap! What did I just do? Exactly. Okay, all good. Well, I think apart from these is simply meaning apart from these. Yes, that's true. I thought of that as well. You know what? Let's look at the Greek. I've got the Greek right here. So in that Trallian's quote, which they used to say, oh, look, without that three-tier structure, you don't have the church, therefore you need that three-tier structure necessarily. So apart from these, blah, 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 blah. Where is it? Without these, no group can be called a church. Okay. Choris touton ecclesia ou kalitai. And I believe, no, I think that's actually correct. So basically my argument from before, Magnesians, I retract the retraction. So my argument's still up, just transferring it to here. He is assuming this structure. The context of his arguments, of almost all of his letters, including this one, is about, look, you need to maintain your submission to these leaders. And so then when he says, without these, no group can be called a church, it's a bit of a gloss, actually. It says, choris touton ecclesia ou kalitai. It literally says, without these, a church is not called. Without these, a church is not called. So it may well still be the case, as per my prior argument, that Ignatius simply assumes this structure. He's not actually arguing for that structure over another structure, but rather, as in the context of this letter and in multiple other letters, people who do things apart from their ecclesial authorities, people just going off and doing whatever they want apart from their ecclesial authorities, which in his context are the bishop, priests, bishop, presbyters, and deacons, then you're not a church. Simple as that. Without those leaders, I'd still have a minor bit of disagreement with Ignatius there in extraordinary circumstances, which he's addressing the ordinary circumstances, so he might not even disagree with me. But so yes, point being, his argument here, as I said before, it's separating yourself from your leaders, period, not the non-acceptance of this specific three-tier structure. That makes much better sense of what he's talking about in the context of the letter of the Trallians, and well, virtually all of his other letters as well. So let me just be into the bishop. Blah, blah, blah. That's pretty much how he. That's the context. That is the context. It's about submission to your leaders, full stop. Which in that context, bishop, presbyters, and deacons. And he assumes that structure. And so to be without them, you cannot call yourself a church. But he's not saying that other structures cannot exist. He simply assumes that this is the case. And so if you are to willingly separate yourself from your church leaders, who in that case are the bishop, presbyters, and deacons, then you cannot call yourself a church. That argument, as I said earlier, again, I'm retracting the retraction, would apply. He could still apply this argument to a plural episcopacy. He would not have a problem with it. So yeah, thank you very much for that catch, Wilson, for the Trallians quote. That's very much help. Josh, good to see you here, my buddy. Your stats. Catholics assert that Protestants don't have churches but ecclesial communities, yet many Protestants do have a bishop, presbyter, and deacon. Well, they'd simply say that you're not in apostolic succession. You're separate from the Bishop of Rome, who is the central marking point of the one Catholic Apostolic Church. So that's what they would say.
Exactly. It is literally the root of deacon, and it's sometimes translated as deacon in the New Testament, other times translated as servant. And bizarrely, it's used to describe Phoebe. It's used to describe Jesus. It's used to describe the 12 apostles. It's used to describe St. Paul. It's used to describe all sorts of people who weren't deacons, or weren't only deacons in the case of the ordained. And then it's not used in Acts 6 to describe the first 7 deacons. And so,
yeah, that's interesting.
You just can't make the word-based argument. It's not a very strong argument. And the reason is really simple. By the time the New Testament documents are being written, the first documents are probably St. Paul's letters. But we know they're St. Paul's letters to churches,
right? Meaning
the church predates the New Testament. So you don't have...
Oh my gosh, I hate this argument so much. Sola Scriptura is not for all time. There were times of active revelation, and when those revelations were not written down for others to read in the future. Very simple.
Some New Testament instruction guide on how to build the church from scratch,
right?
Because they weren't building churches from scratch. The churches already existed, and so it's only
by the time we have the first New Testament document, we'll call it, let's say, First Thessalonians. The church has existed for 20 years,
right?
For 20 years. The church has gone through one generation before you have the first canonical document in the New Testament. So, I mean, 20 years is a long time to have a leadership structure in place.
Yeah, and so in 1 Timothy 3, talks about the bishop.
I really don't know what this has to do with monepiscopacy, let alone the monepiscopacy of Rome. I mean, yeah, just very basic common sense. Any prop would say, well, yeah, of course the church existed before the first New Testament writings. I mean, are they going on to sola scriptura polemics now? Like, I'm kind of confused.
Singular, and then talks about deacons, and it doesn't mention elders, but then in 1 Timothy 5, elders are mentioned. So people are left saying, okay, well, does he think elders is just another term for the bishop or for deacons, or is he describing 3 offices? And I think someone going
or
to
2
the text alone,
or 2 fallacy of the excluded middle. We're going to see more of that later on.
Wouldn't be able to conclusively arrive at a conclusion. And I think authority describing 3 offices. And I think someone going just off the text alone wouldn't be able to conclusively arrive at a conclusion.
No, not true. Not true at all. I mean, sure, most New Testament books don't really mention the structure at all. You can't glean anything from you can't glean much, if at all, from most individual New Testament books. But looking at the totality of them together in context, and particularly Paul's pastoral epistles, so 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, but particularly 1 Timothy and Titus. Yes, it's well, actually no, 1 Timothy primarily, where he explicitly demarcates the qualifications of 2 offices in the church to Timothy. That's Timothy's very role, to establish the order in the orders in the church of Ephesus. And what does Paul do? Here's the qualifications for the episkopos, the overseer, and here is the qualifications for the diakonos, the servant, the deacon. That's quite clear to me, and that's that 2-tier structure very easily makes sense of all the otherwise not as clear texts throughout, for example, the book of Acts and other Pauline letters, such as Philippians, I believe, and Philippians as well, where he, I believe it's the start of Philippians, yes, where he says he is with the presbyters or the episcopoi, one of those, and the deacons, so only 2 groups of orders from where he is. So it is actually very easy to glean that from Scripture, what that church structure, at least that what Paul was providing for, what Paul established, is there. And then, of course, you go to 1 Clement, he confirms that this is the norm among the apostles. So there you go. So going by the text alone, quote unquote, it's actually, no, that's not true. You can come across a structure quite easily.
I think, case in point, Protestantism has massively different ecclesiologies.
Right.
So does Rome, from the very earliest church ecclesiologies. They themselves would admit that. Like, every church group has developed massive elaborations from their origins. Even Roman Catholicism would admit this, but they obviously say that they maintain the same core basic structure from the very earliest days of the church. Okay, that's fine. You can claim that. I disagree, but you can claim that. But you do, by your own admission, have vast elaborations on the structure. Even between different rites of the Catholic Church, you can have massive distinctions. I mean, far out. So yeah, and it's not just and obviously not just Protestant denominations either, but the structures between the Orthodox, the Catholics, and all that stuff. Yes, you guys do share a lot of similarities. You also have some pretty key differences. So, yeah,
the structure of a Protestant church varies more widely from denomination to denomination than almost any bit of theology.
Some Protestants have bishops. Other Protestants just have a single pastor.
Exactly.
Some are more
single pastor like a single bishop.
congregationalist.
Right, you'll have congregational, presbyteral, and episcopal governance.
Yep.
And a ton of variations on that theme. John Calvin argued there was a 4-fold structure in the church, and no one takes his view. And then St. Paul mentions all of these ministries and offices without specifying which ones are which. You just
contextualized by his pastoral epistles. Very simple. And it's not for granted that, I think even Joe Heschmeyer himself says that we distinguish between offices and ministries in those particular Pauline texts. I know what he's talking about, like in 1 Corinthians, when he says first there are established apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, and all that stuff. And I think 1 or 2 other places where he mentions all sorts of other roles. Is Paul establishing offices? Well, that's not necessarily a given. You kind of have to assume that in order to say that there is a confusion.
Just from the text alone, from the biblical text alone, you're not able to reconstruct in the same way that if you were to just take like the speeches of George Washington to try to figure out what the structure of the United States looks like, he probably couldn't do it.
Right.
Because it's, he might address like the governors or something. Like, oh, are there a lot of governors per state? Or is he addressing all of the governors in the country? Those kinds of things. Because it was never meant to be used for that. Like that's a misuse of the New Testament.
Both the New Testament, and we have things like the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, and then we go, well,
it's a red herring anyway, because we don't just say, oh, just the New Testament alone. We go off that. I go off the New Testament, First Clement, and the Didache. And the New Testament is a number of sources, by the way, but putting them all together, synthesizing them together, the picture becomes very, very clear. So, and we'll get to that.
So when we go even further, unfortunately, we don't have a lot to draw from, because at least in the early, because I think a lot of these critics will say, I'm willing to give you by the time of Pope Victor I, you have the papacy.
Right.
A lot of them are willing to grant, yes, we have the Bishop of Rome, who has authority over other bishops or other churches.
Who claims to have authority over other bishops and churches. See my discussion yesterday with Greg. We disagree on this point, but we both agree that Victor did not have universal authority over the whole church. And we actually give good evidence for that. And we also have an argument back and forth on whether Victor did have a legitimate claim over authority over Ephesus specifically. So high-level discussion there on that topic yesterday. Check that stream out when you can.
And that would place us around the end of the 2nd century. Right. But what we look at, like, really, our biggest witnesses are going to be the letter of Clement, who we would traditionally recognize to be the 3rd successor of St. Peter, the 4th Pope. And then the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch, because we've got other...
And the Didache. You're missing the Didache.
Apologists, like Athenagoras or Tatian de Syria. They're not talking about church governance.
Well, I think the other source we have is later in the 2nd century, but looking backwards, which would be the Roman lists compiled by Hegesippus in 160 and Irenaeus in 180, that they are tracing every bishop from the time of the apostles, every bishop of Rome, from the time of the apostles down to their day, with Eleutherius, who's the 13th successor.
And people try to write that off like, oh, well, Irenaeus, he's writing 150 years after the time of Jesus. But in your book, which you all should pick up by...
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That kind of argument is pretty silly, because a lot of our historical knowledge is gained from reliable sources who are otherwise written centuries after the fact. And they are often our earliest sources, because the sources that they use, earlier sources, sometimes even contemporary sources with the subject they're talking about, are lost. And so we rely on those centuries later sources to make historical claims for us. So it's totally legitimate to take seriously the claims of someone 150, even 200 or 300 years after the fact, if it can be, if we can give them the granting that they consulted sources earlier than themselves. There's no problem with that. So yeah, that kind of argument I'm not very sympathetic to.
So the early church was a Catholic church. I need my little royalty after that.
Exactly.
You make a good connection that's not that far. You use the example of Alex Hildebrand, who just recently passed away.
The example was applicable when the book came out, and for about 4 weeks after. Yeah. And I point out that the gap in time between the death of the apostles Peter and Paul and the time of the writing of Against Heresies in 180 is like 114 years. And 114 years ago, the now late Alice von Hildebrand, who was still alive, her husband was in college, and she has a book describing what it was like for Dietrich von Hildebrand at university. She didn't, of course, know him then, but she married him and was still alive when the book came out. So 114 years, not that long. The other example is just take the actual 2nd century. Like, we know the Apostle John dies in about 100. He has 2 students we know of, Ignatius of Antioch, which we've already mentioned, and then Polycarp of Smyrna. Polycarp is born in 69 AD. He dies at the age of 86 in 155 AD. We know a lot of details of his martyrdom because accounts of his martyrdom are written down before 12 months is up. Right. I mean, in honor of the 1-year anniversary of his death, an account of his martyrdom is published. And he is the mentor of Irenaeus. So Irenaeus learned Christianity from a student of the apostle. Like, this is also, like, by the way, Irenaeus is the first person to tell us Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the 4 Gospels. Right. So Protestants who say we can't trust Irenaeus, he's a liar, he's making up details about
those guys are silly.
Church of Rome. He's either untrustworthy because he's like a total dupe and somehow was tricked into believing a 30-year-old institution was 115 years old, or he's a liar by trying to somehow convince the Romans that they've always had.
Or he was honestly mistaken, because you can apply this argument. I don't even necessarily disagree with it, but They do this multiple times. It's quite frustrating. They make good points, but in such a sloppy way that opens them up to such biting comebacks. Like, for example, you could apply everything they say here to the claim of when Irenaeus says that Jesus died around 50 years old. You can apply it one for one. Oh, you're just saying that he was duped. Well, guess what? He learned Christianity from a student of the apostles, and it's not very far apart. So clearly he could be very historical. You can put all of that onto the age of Christ, which of course is problematic because the Gospels themselves preclude that in their chronology. When you look at chronological synchronisms, for example, like with the rule of Herod, the time of Pilate, all that stuff. So so that points to the real thing, that we're not saying it doesn't have to either be, oh, Irenaeus is a dumb goof or he's a liar. He could be honestly mistaken with the evidence he has. Simple as that. And so, and I'm not even necessarily saying that Irenaeus is wrong on this issue. I think there's another way to interpret the bishops' list that actually coheres perfectly fine with an early plural episcopacy. And that's not just shoehorning. It's because of the fact that, just as with the age of Jesus, we have earlier, more reliable contemporaneous evidence demonstrating that Jesus did not die around 50. Likewise, we have such evidence for the plural episcopacy. We have the Acts of the Apostles, where the elders, plural, of Ephesus, Paul says that they were made overseers, episcopi or episcopus in that exact freaking case, or whatever it is. We have Paul's own letters himself, where he says, with his letter Philippians, for example, he's present with either the presbyters or the episcopi, the overseers, and the deacons he's present with them in the sending of his letter, with two different groups, the overseers and the deacons. And likewise with the qualifications, when he is telling Timothy, hey, Timothy, here's how you establish a church hierarchy. You establish episcopoi with these qualifications and diakonoi with these qualifications. That's it. No middle road of presbyters, no third tier. It's that simple. Very two. And then you combine that with the didache. The didache itself, which says, let me pull it up right here. Should be just down about here. Concerning the Eucharist. It's in chapter 15 of the didache. Chapter 15. Okay. Bishops and deacons. Therefore, appoint for yourself bishops and deacons, worthy of the Lord, men who are humble and not avaricious, and true and approved, for they too carry out your ministry, the ministry of the prophets and teachers. You must not therefore despise them, for they are your honored men along with the prophets and teachers. That's it. Appoint bishops and deacons. And two tiers right here in the didache. Likewise with First Clement. Let me bring that up right now. I know this off. I know the references off by heart because I've studied First Clement on ecclesiology quite deeply, as you can see with my stream, if anyone wants to look at it in the past. The apostles, from chapter 42. The apostles received the gospel for us from the Lord Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was sent forth from God. So then Christ is from God. The apostles are from Christ. Both therefore came of the will of God in good order. Having therefore received their orders and being fully assured by the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ and the full faith in the word of God, they went forth with the firm assurance of that the Holy Spirit gives, preaching the good news that the kingdom of God was about to come. So preaching both in the country and in the towns, they appointed their first fruits when they had tested them by the Spirit to be bishops, or again, I prefer overseers, not a loaded term, to be overseers, episcopus, and deacons, diakonus, for the future believers. And this was no new thing they did, for indeed something had been written about bishops and deacons many years ago. For somewhere thus the scripture says, I'll appoint their bishops in righteousness and their deacons in faith. So we even have here, right here, a typology from the book of Isaiah. That's what he's citing. He's citing the book of Isaiah, the LXX, the Septuagint translation, which looks at a two-tier structure of, or allegedly, of bishops and deacons. Now, it's not exactly the same context in Isaiah, of course. But point being, we see First Clement to apply their logic, because they love appealing to the earliest believers. And hey, I agree with that. But let's apply that consistently now. Clement, a contemporary of the apostles, who knew at least the apostle Paul personally, and he is appealing to a typology of Isaiah to demonstrate a two-tier hierarchy in the church of bishops and deacons, and with bishops, he conflates them with presbyters. So, for example, Our apostles likewise knew through our Lord Jesus Christ that there would be strife over the bishop's office, the episcopacy. For this reason, therefore, having received complete foreknowledge, they appointed the leaders mentioned earlier, and afterwards they gave the officers a permanent character. That is, if they should die, other men approved should succeed to their ministry. These, therefore, who were appointed by them or later on by other reputable men with the consent of the whole church, and who have ministered to the flock of Christ blamelessly, humbly, peaceably, blah, 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 these we consider to be unjustly removed from their ministry. For it will be no small sin for us if we depose from the bishop's office those who have offered the gifts blamelessly and in holiness. Blessed are those presbyters who have gone ahead, who took their departure at a mature and fruitful age, for they need no longer fear that someone may remove them from their established place. Bishops, overseers being removed from their office, presbyters being removed from their office. The same group of people, one of multiple places in First Clement. So what's the point of all this? Why am I dropping all my quotes here now? Why am I doing this? Because they're trying to put a dichotomy between the historical reliability of Irenaeus or the early plural episcopacy. They're trying to make you choose either or, and that if you do otherwise, you're just if you choose the plural episcopacy, you're just saying Irenaeus was a dupe or he's a liar. No, we don't have to do either, and we are forced to make that conclusion that he is maybe erroneous. Because I don't even have to say that. You can interpret, as I did in my stream, that the bishops' list, at least for the very earliest bishops, looked at, so to speak, a chairman of the board of the bishops. So he's still fundamentally an equal bishop among other bishops, but for the purposes of governance, to streamline things, make sure there's proper order, the plural bishops may have appointed a chairman of the board, for example, so to speak, but fundamentally they're all the same. And that could very easily account for why bishops' lists originate with one single bishop, even in the earliest times, despite the fact that the evidence, very explicit in here and in the New Testament, demonstrates plural episcopacy was quite ubiquitous. So, look, point being, it's not just about Irenaeus. It's and impugning his character or anything like that. It's just simple. Look, Irenaeus says one thing, the evidence appears to say another. So either you can say that we should trust Irenaeus over all the other multiple independent sources from the apostolic fathers and the New Testament itself, or you can simply say Irenaeus might have gotten something wrong, or you can reinterpret Irenaeus as a chairman of the board type of thing with the bishops' lists. It's very simple, people. You don't have to cause all these problems. When you're forcing these conclusions like this, you make so many problems. You sacrifice your historical case so much, which ironically Roman Catholic apologists try to do. They try to say, oh, look, the early church believed this, all the fathers believe that. Well, okay, here's multiple sources from the New Testament and the earliest fathers clearly demonstrating a two-tier structure. Oh, no, we can't believe that. And a plural episcopacy. No, I can't believe that. Sorry, if you guys are watching Trent Horn and Joe Heschmeyer, this is me, my Aussie and Lebanese humor. I take the crap out of people all the time, even though I love them. That's just how we do it. When I'm doing responses, I like to have fun. But I hope you enjoyed the substance here. And God willing, I kind of hope you guys respond, because that would be fun. It'd really give me a good boost. Anyway, let's continue.
This comes up, for me, it really shows to a burden of proof that I think that we should push back on. I would say the burden of proof is not that there was a first century bishop of Rome, but what I think they make a lot of dubious, most of their arguments are very dubious arguments from silence. And arguments from silence
positive assertions.
Dangerous. I'm actually working on this in my current book, comparing the arguments between Protestants and atheists. That atheists do the same thing.
I'm sorry, Trent.
Protestants, they'll say, well, Jesus was really born of a virgin. Why didn't Paul say so?
Okay, that is true. There are Protestants who can make really stretched arguments from silence. Some of them quite laughable, and you can definitely apply them back as atheists do. Other arguments from silence are quite significant, but maybe we'll get to them, maybe we won't.
Right.
Because it's not just silence. Like, the thing that really frustrates me, because Trent Horn likes to go on this about, and Joe Heschmeyer a lot, that they're just making arguments from silence, when they don't give the positive thing for historical study, that there is actually a valid use of the argument from silence. I've got up on my bookshelf over there, really awesome book. I was so lucky to get it because it was the only one I could find online. A Guide to Historical Method by a Jesuit priest, ironically, Father Gilbert Garrigan. And he has a whole section listing out, explain the criteria for arguments from silence and applying it to real examples in historical sources. And the two criteria are that, one, an argument from silence is valid when, one, the author certainly would have known about the thing that he doesn't mention. And two, given the circumstances, in this case, in a particular text, he would most certainly have mentioned it, lest it be to his massive disadvantage or whatever. And he lists a bunch of disadvantages that could be the case. So the author knew about it, and he would have mentioned it in this context. If you can establish those two, you get a good argument from silence. A third criteria, which Dr. Falk, I got from him in our interview, Dr. David Falk. A third thing, it's kind of a criteria for the second one, where not only does he not mention it in a circumstance where it's expected, but also the author provides something else in its place. And that's what we have here. We have those three criteria, two criteria and one sub-criteria established in the earliest fathers like Clement and the Didache, and in the New Testament text that we have a very explicit affirmation of episcopoi/presbyteroi, same people, and deacons. That's a positive assertion. That's not an argument from silence. That is a positive assertion of two-tier structure, and that there was multiple of them at various churches. First Clement, for example, very explicit. There were multiple episcopoi/presbyteroi at Corinth who were overthrown. That's not an argument from silence. That's explicit evidence.
Didn't Mark say so? Mythicists will say, well, Jesus really did was a man.
Oh yeah. And on this thing on the burden of proof, I'm so frustrated at like the tennis games people play with, like, oh, you have the burden. I don't have the burden of proof. You have the burden of proof. Everybody has the flipping burden of proof. Can we just do that? If you make a positive or a negative claim, everybody has the burden of proof. You can't prove a negative. Shut the frick up, cringe tard. Everybody has a burden of proof. And I'm not singling them out here, but that's kind of what they do. Well, no, you guys, Protestants have the burden of proof to say that there wasn't a mono-episcopacy. Well, no, that's bullcrap. Everyone has a burden of proof to explain the evidence. Your theory needs to be able to satisfactorily account for all the evidence. I liken it to a tennis game. Whoever takes the first shot, they took that first shot. Then the other person has the obligation to shoot back, and then the other person has the obligation to shoot back. So I kind of think of it as like a burden of response. When someone makes a claim in an argument, you're obligated to respond. All right. But everyone ultimately has to make a hit. Everybody has the burden of proof. Everyone has to hit the tennis ball at some point. So I have a burden of proof to explain the evidence in the apostolic fathers in the New Testament. And I do that very easily with a very simple theory that there was a two-tier office, and that at least most churches, if not all of them, because we have no indication to the contrary, were run by multiple overseers. And I can very easily explain all the evidence with that theory. And you likewise have a burden of proof to explain that evidence. And let's be frank, you can't, because we do have explicit affirmations of multiple overseers at multiple churches, such as Ephesus and Corinth, a couple of the most prominent early churches. Let's not forget that. Ephesus and Corinth were among the most prominent churches in the early church because they were among the largest cities in the early church, in ancient Rome, for crying out loud. So, and then of course with the intro of First Clement, likewise, where the typical intro with the ancient letters is like, I, this dude, to this guy, I send you greetings and all that. The author names themselves and they name their recipients. Who's the recipient named in First Clement? The church at Rome. And how does this church at Rome refer to itself in First Clement? We, us, we, us. That is, sure, you could technically construe that to say, oh, well, that's just a plural we or whatever, even though there's no use of I anywhere, like with papal bulls, for example, when they sometimes do a plural we, but it'll always include an I somewhere. But it's best explained by the simple idea that Rome was just like the other churches around them, and they had multiple bishops. It's a simpler theory. It's much easier explanation. Your theory does not cohere well with the data. Everyone has the burden of proof, and well, I think you guys fail, but yeah, either way.
And not just a myth. Why doesn't Paul quote Jesus' teaching about taxes in Romans 13 when he does say pay your taxes? Like, I don't know, but that doesn't take away from the evidence I do have for these.
Okay, actually, there's a few questions actually I want to take a look at right now. Very Lebanese to do that. Donna, I wish I knew what you're talking about here. I can't exactly time my reactions to all these things. And then there's an argument in the comments about Irenaeus being 50. Yes, Irenaeus was 50. If anyone, Irenaeus believed Jesus died at 50. If you doubt that, go to my blog, theotherpaul64.blogspot.com. one of my more recent articles is on that. It very clearly is that. Not just that Jesus was old, but that he died specifically around 50. That book sounds really interesting. By the way, Alex, good to see you. Alhamdulillah, good to see you here, cuz. That book sounds really interesting. Is there a PDF of it? So if you're talking about a guide to the historical method, unfortunately there isn't. I actually tried to find a PDF and I could not find it. So this is a genuine rare find. Let me get it really quickly. This bad boy right here. Really, really freaking awesome book. Super useful. I want to use it when I get into history teaching again. I want to use this as like a core text, really. If you can find it somewhere else online, like do try. Like maybe there's somewhere I missed when I was initially looking for it, but I found the last copy that was on Amazon. So really, really lucky. Really, really good book. But yeah. Tertullian is an example of an argument from science that is valid because he lists numerous people who are assumed to heaven but not Mary. Yeah, that's a very valid argument from science. There you go. I can't wait for that debate, by the way. For those who don't know, Steve Christie here, born again RN. He's debating Trent Horn in a month or two on the Marian dogmas in Scripture. So that's going to be really cool. Catholics bear the burden of proof for their doctrines and claims. That is true. We likewise bear the burden of proof for our doctrines and claims. No office of the papacy mentioned in the New Testament. Yes, I would agree. And I believe it would be I believe that is a genuinely significant science that we don't have Jesus anywhere saying, by the way, Peter, your successors have a supreme authority over everyone in the entire church. It's a very simple premise that divine authority is conferred. It doesn't evolve. And so if there is no evidence that Christ actually established that divine authority over Peter's successors, let alone over Peter himself, then that's bloody big. But yeah. Can you repeat the name of the book, please? Yes. A Guide to Historical Method. So, A Guide to Historical Method by Gilbert Garrigan, and that's how you spell Garrigan right there. Garraghan. Really, really good book. I was talking about you ribbing people as comedy being Lebanese, and yes, that was the book I was talking about. I'll look for it online. I might have to bite the bullet and pay some freedom bucks. Well, hey, but yes, us Lebanese, we are excellent with that humor on ribbing people. Wallah, wallah. Cannot wait to learn Arabic. So once I start making Arabic content, modern standard Arabic, so like everyone in the Arabic world can understand me, it's going to be more colorful, I reckon. Thank you. You are welcome. But yes, we shall continue. I'll go back a couple seconds.
Paul quote Jesus' teaching about taxes in Romans 13 when he does say pay your taxes. Like, I don't know, but that doesn't take away from the evidence I do have for these things.
Yeah, likewise.
A tentative response to that. We can't, which is that they're writing on scrolls and they're writing with limitation. Now, anyone old enough listening to this who remembers T9 phones when you had to carefully
You know what is really freaking ironic about this? Super, super ironic with this claims of, oh, silence bad because we don't have all the other things. And yet that doesn't follow that they don't exist because they're silent. I remember so clearly Joe Heschmeyer himself making the argument. I believe in his back and forth, his debate with Gavin Ortland, Dr. Gavin Ortland. I think it was there where he would say, well, if there's the plural episcopacy, then why don't we have the lists of the multiple bishops? Where are they? Can you please show us those lists or whatever? So he's fine with making a silence there when it works for him. But apparently this silence is, oh no, that's a bad kind of silence. And by the way, we don't even rely on silence, at least not exclusively. Not even, there's partial relevance and value we glean from certain silences on this topic for sure. But we're mostly using positive evidence to the contrary. So, I mean, yeah, so really what they're doing here, I don't want to, because they may be going simply after a certain low-hanging fruit type of Protestant, which is never really the good thing to do. You should never go after low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, because you'll destroy all the fruit if you go after the highest fruit. And when people learn that, even laymen, they'll be able to destroy the low-hanging fruit by themselves. Too easy. But yeah, that's, I don't know what else to say. It's just inconsistency, very inconsistent in their apologetic method.
3 times in order to get a T or whatever. Your text messages were a lot shorter.
Oh, Justice. Yeah, YouTube live comments. It's super frustrating, but it automatically filters out most links. I don't know if you're on my Discord. If you are not, you can join the Discord in the link below. Same for anyone else here. And then you could send the link there if you want. That would be able to work. or potentially in a YouTube comment proper, although sometimes those are filtered out as well. So yeah, or you could direct message me on like my Facebook page or Twitter, or tag me on Twitter. Those will work as well.
They are now, because it's a lot easier to write. So right now, you can write a 70,000 word book because it's easy to type and correct mistakes when they come up and go back and edit in chunks. When you're writing by hand on a scroll, word economy is enormous. So the physical writings of the 1st and 2nd century are much shorter than later books. And it's not shocking why they are. And before the printing press, writings are shorter. So making an argument from silence that a guy who writes for 3...
Great. Thank you for sacrificing every argument you make about there being no early church evidence for a symbolic Eucharist or for a symbolic baptism or for sola scriptura. Thank you for sacrificing every single one of your arguments of silence against Protestant distinctives. I really appreciate that move.
3 pages. Doesn't include every Christian teaching.
Right.
It's a miserably weak argument.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the arguments of silence that are made. So one would be that there is no bishop of Rome, because when St. Ignatius of Antioch writes to the Church of Rome, his letter to the Romans, he doesn't mention that there is a bishop at Rome. He doesn't discuss anything like that. And I want to bring it up so we don't forget, it was a great analogy we were discussing before this episode, was that he certainly does. There is a single bishop of churches in his time, because he refers to himself in the letter to the Bishop of Rome, the letter to the church at Rome, he refers to himself as a bishop. And in the other letters to the other churches in Asia Minor, which is now modern day Turkey, he addresses that it is presumed there is a single bishop in those churches. So why wouldn't we just, so the analogy you gave, I'll let you explain it, would be about, let's say someone like Dr. James Dobson was writing letters to 7 Christian churches on marriage. So okay. So just to, if I can, just to spell a little more of the argument from silence you're talking about. Father Raymond Brown is one of the most famous to offer this. He says, to explain Ignatius's insistence on and defense of the threefold order, one must posit that the single bishop model appeared in Antioch and Asia Minor circa 100. So because bishops are mentioned in Ignatius's other letters, therefore they must be new. Yeah, because he's insisting that you follow the bishop. This must be a new thing he has to drill into.
But then later in the same book, he argues that the signal failure of Ignatius to mention the single bishop in his letter to the Romans, he goes on to say, makes it likely that the single bishop structure did not come to Rome till circa 140 to 150. So if he mentions it, or if he doesn't mention it, either way, that proves Father Brown's case that the papacy didn't exist. And that's a terrible argument.
And I agree, that's pretty shite.
It's a heads I win, tails you lose argument.
Right, because here's the thing. What we could ask then, Father Brown, what would Ignatius have to say
or not say
for you to believe that this institution has been around for a long time? Because for me, he might say, well, if he said that we've received this from the apostles, well, why wouldn't you could just say he's like Irenaeus and he's been duped, You could still come up with an excuse, even if you had something like that. So you're right. So if he does say, follow the bishop, he's so insistent, it must be new. And he doesn't tell the people at Rome to follow their bishop, that means there was no bishop. We can't have the third alternative. Well, it's just presumed every church has a bishop.
Exactly. The one thing it proves is that bishops already exist in at least 6 of the 7 churches. Because he's not telling them you should really put a bishop in place. He's greeting their bishops by name.
So let's imagine James Dobson writes his letters on marriage.
So imagine he's got 6 letters, and to the first 6 families he writes, obey your mom and dad. And in the 7th, and he mentions in the letters, you don't have a family without a mother and father, or whatever. And then the 7th one, he just praises the family as a model family, and maybe says something about the parents, but doesn't go into any detail about the mother and father.
Or let's say this 7th letter he's writing to the Joneses, and he says, this is a family that I take lessons from. I don't give this family lessons. So let's say he's writing to 7 families about what it means to have a Christian marriage. 6 of them, obey your mom and dad. There needs to be a mother and father. To the Joneses, hey, the Joneses.
See earlier arguments.
The family. I take lessons from them, people. But he never says that the Joneses have a mother and father.
Yeah, he refers to this church, Ignatius, when he's speaking to the Romans, refers to them as a church that presides. And he describes them as presiding in charity. He speaks to them as one he looks up to, rather than as one he feels like he can give unsolicited advice to.
Right.
And so it's not shocking that he's not going to give unsolicited advice. In the same way that if you're saying, I'm writing to you this great model family, that's not the time that you're probably going to launch into obey your mother and father and do this and do that.
And it would be ridiculous to say in that example, oh, he wrote to the Joneses. They're the model family. If someone said, if you notice in Dr. Dobson's letter, he only uses the terms family and parents. Not once in the letter to the Joneses does he say mother or father. Therefore, the Joneses were a same-sex couple.
Right.
Because otherwise, if they were just model family, you would say that makes no sense. He doesn't have to say it because it's presumed that they are the paradigmatic example, the model. Just like when Ignatius writes to the church at Rome, if there are bishops in other churches, and this is the best church, the one that leads the others, it's going to be the same as the others, and there's going to...
Well, I mostly agree, and this is another area where I mostly agree with them. The mere appeal to a silence in Ignatius doesn't really mean much, because there's many people who would otherwise be in those churches whom he doesn't name. I mean, think about it. He doesn't even name the plural bishops in Rome. Therefore, there wasn't a plural episcopacy in Rome, so it doesn't exactly work either way. The explanation that he doesn't name anyone because he doesn't want them to be caught out by the Roman persecutors, that's a very plausible explanation. I actually personally buy that myself. What's important, however, is that Ignatius is therefore not evidence for a mono-episcopacy in Rome. That's the important thing. If they wanted to, so what they do with these inferences here, strictly speaking, not necessarily the case, because we saw with the arguments that Ignatius is making, he's not arguing for that mono-episcopacy structure against a non-mono-episcopacy structure, but rather assuming the mono-episcopacy structure in a local church and then saying to the people within, if you depart from your hierarchy, from that hierarchy, which is the norm, then you're not a church. Not because you went on and started up and got a different hierarchy, not because this otherwise fully functional church started by the apostles has a different structure, but because you are departing from your hierarchy. That is Ignatius's core point. It's not the mono-episcopacy itself. It's the mere fact that that you're departing from your hierarchy, full stop. That's the full context of Ignatius. Those are the largest concerns of the earliest Christians like Clement and Ignatius, for example. People going off doing their own thing and starting off heretical parties. But that is what is important with that is that Ignatius' silence on Rome still does leave open the window of whether the plural episcopacy in Rome went all the way into the early 2nd century. That would be very interesting to consider, because given that Ignatius is only assuming the mono-episcopacy and not strictly speaking arguing for it over another system, he may well either know that Rome has a plural episcopacy and he's just not naming them because, well, persecution, or even if he was strictly arguing for mono-episcopacy, he may simply not know how the ecclesial politics of Rome works. And so he'd get a pretty rude awakening when he arrives there. I mean, hey, no early church fathers infallible, so that's a possibility. You can't deny that as an example. Ignatius' lack of mention of the bishops fits with everything else. Yeah, that's right. It's not a proof itself, but it fits. It fits well with us, and it works for them as well. They can explain it just fine. That he doesn't want to out them to the persecutors, but we can explain it just fine as well. Yeah, either way, works for us.
There'd be a bishop there.
And Ignatius mentioned, as you kind of alluded to, he mentions being the bishop in the singular sense twice in his letter. So he assumes they know that there's one bishop per city.
They're not. I mean, it depends on how he uses that. I'm not precisely sure here. If he says like the bishop episcopos of a certain place, then that would, like with an article, for example, then that would more likely prove that, yes, but not necessarily the case. He could still call himself bishop of a place if there's multiple bishops. Although, given what he's saying and how thoroughly he assumes a mono-episcopacy, that is unlikely. So whatever, it's just a thought.
And again, he holds him up as the model. But more than that, if you want to understand like why does the letter to the Romans read differently, there are really, really obvious reasons.
Yes.
In the case of all the other letters, he's writing to churches that he knew personally from his travels through Asia Minor en route to his martyrdom.
Yeah, you can look on a map, all of them, to the Trallians, the Smyrnians, the Magnesians, the Ephesians. Mm-hmm. When you look at them on a map, you can put little pinpoint dots in, and it's all within like a day's journey. Yeah, it's all within like a day's journey of Antioch, and he's the big heavy hitter because he's the bishop of Antioch.
And these are probably people who had personally ministered to him,
right,
as he's a prisoner, because the Romans didn't feed prisoners. They would have other people come and take care of prisoners.
For background for everyone, the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, they were written while he was being escorted to Rome for his martyrdom. And so he was writing letters during this time, and the Romans, like you said, they're not going to take care of you. Oh, you have visitors? They can give you bread. Right. And you can give them letters at that time. And
yeah, they have a disproportionate focus on Ignatius. Really, the New Testament texts in First Clement and the Didache. Ignatius is important, yes, I'll grant that, but that earlier evidence, without them addressing that, their case really means nothing. They could show that Ignatius is the most ardent, fanatical jihadist for the monepiscopacy in church history, and that wouldn't mean nothing if they can't offer a superior explanation of other earlier texts, multiple earlier texts from multiple authors, multiple sources. The case really falls short without, because their treatment of, like, I'm genuinely surprised. Their treatment of scripture, super brief, and it's just obfuscatory. They don't even try to get a harmonious picture out of scripture. If they honestly tried it and they thought they couldn't get a coherent picture out of scripture, so we can't just rely on scripture, I'd dispute them. But okay, at least you try. They don't even try to, man. Come on. Likewise with the Didache and Clement, they just say, oh, Clement says high priest, Levite, priest, and Levite, therefore 3-tier structure. Come on. There's like they don't deal with even half the text. Like, they don't deal with any of the text really of First Clement, nor even mention the Didache once. Sorry, people. 1 second. Got something called. Anyway, in the entirety of their video, they sidestep the important archaeological case against the mono-episcopacy that Peter Lamp laid out. I would love to look that up. I haven't seen that. I've heard murmurs myself of an archaeological case, but I haven't personally seen it, so I'd love to look that up. But yeah, we shall continue. If anyone, I'm not planning on like a super elaborate Q&A or anything, but if anyone wants to ask questions once we finish this, then that's 1 second. Anyway, one more. Shit, Alex. Glad to see you're now a new regular fan viewer. I do agree it is odd they're so obsessed with Ignatius. They should know that the way church fathers are treated are with a position of consensus, not the opinion of one father for this very reason. Yeah, I know. I think it's actually kind of ironic, because if we include the apostolic writers as the fathers with whom we can get a consensus, because that's how I like to treat the New Testament writers. They themselves are church fathers as well. They are historical sources, akin to the later writers, although obviously with differences. If we're going to argue from consensus, well, the first century consensus is very clearly plural episcopacy, generically speaking. Not strictly just with Rome, but just as the norm. The norm is plural episcopacy. And so that should be assumed for Rome as well, without any evidence to the contrary, which they don't have until, well, not even with Ignatius. They don't have that until, I don't know, the mid-2nd century maybe. But yeah, it's ironic, because their whole thing is the consensus of the fathers and not merely a historical case from one father. Not that Ignatius is nothing, again, but again, it's the inconsistencies in the Catholic apologetic method. We shall... very rare to see Catholic exegete scripture for their doctrines. Always go to some church father. Sadly, that's very true. And when they do try to go for scripture, it's like, wow, bruh. Bruh.
So that's why he's in a position where he can give them advice, because he knows them. He knows them intimately. In the same way that if you're writing letters to friends and family, you might give them advice on their current situation that you wouldn't give unsolicited to people you don't know. To the Romans, he doesn't know them. The reason he's writing to them is not to give them pastoral counsel. It's explicitly to ask them.
Are you sure about that? I mean, yes, that is true. The main point is to tell them not to go for martyrdom, or to stop his martyrdom. I'm chapter 4 of Ignatius of the Romans. I am writing to all the churches and insisting everyone that I die for God for my own free will, unless you hinder me. I implore you, do not be so unseasonably kind to me. Let me be food for wild beasts, yet coax wild beasts, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, that's true. He does say, I do not give you orders like Peter and Paul. They were apostles. I am a convict. They were free, but even now I'm a slave. Which is important, which is an important thing of showing how, of throwing into question Catholic ideas of the authority of a bishop, because he very clearly contrasts his authority as a bishop with that of Peter and Paul apostles. But yeah, so there's that. Does he never give pastoral advice in the letter throughout? That is true. Yes, fact check says that is true. The entire letter to the Romans is indeed focused on just, hey, don't stop me from dying. I want to die. Not really any strict pastoral advice, but it's a bit speculative to say that he's not giving it pastoral advice to them because he doesn't have the authority over them. I mean, which assumes that he had authority over the other churches which had their own bishops, which is kind of, that's a big assumption.
Martyrdom, and not to risk their own life trying to save him from martyrdom.
And I would say, for me, another reason, because people will say, oh, well, why doesn't he mention the Bishop of Rome by name? The fact that he doesn't mention the Bishop of Rome by name means there was no Bishop of Rome. Oh, well, that's an interesting argument. But Ignatius doesn't mention any Christian by name in the Church of Rome. Right. Logically, there must have been no Christians in Rome.
He doesn't mention deacons. He doesn't mention presbyters. We might as well argue those didn't exist either. Like the argument from silence is very selectively applied.
It makes sense that he's not going to mention the names of these people. In the letter to the Romans, Ignatius only mentions Crocus, someone who is traveling with him, who was there in Asia Minor. If this letter is intercepted, he's not going to give the Romans the names of the prominent Christians in the city of Rome. So I think that, I think these arguments from silence, we're on the wrong burden of proof here. I want to see the other side make that demonstration. And I think the arguments
it shows that you don't really have a good grasp of the Protestant, much Protestant scholarship or apologetic if you think that it's just relying on silence. It doesn't. It relies on very explicit affirmations in multiple sources. It's,
are pretty weak. So why don't you tie it together?
Well, I'd like to maybe lay out the argument in the opposite direction on the argument for silence, if I may.
Oh, here we go.
Father McGuckian has a piece from Father in New Blackfriars where he points out that the notion of a church choosing its church order is unheard of in Christian tradition until the 16th century.
So this is our argument from silence.
The idea that a church just chooses to change its structure is totally unheard of. And if you think about it, it would be insanely disruptive, and you would find a lot of evidence of that disruption.
All right, let's look up Jerome. Okay, here we go. Do we see that? Yep, cool. Oops, hang on, StreamYard. Yep, awesome. Okay, quoting from Jerome's commentary on Titus, quote, "The presbyter is the same as the bishop, and before parties had been raised up in religion by the provocations of Satan, the churches were governed by the senate of presbyters. But as each one sought to appropriate to himself those whom he had baptized instead of leading them to Christ, it was appointed that one of the presbyters elected by their colleagues should be set over all the others and have chief supervision over the general well-being of the community. Without doubt, it is the duty of the presbyters to bear in mind that by the discipline of the church, they are subordinated to him who has been given them as their head. But it is fitting that the bishops on their side do not forget that if they are set over presbyters, it is the result of tradition and not by the fact of a particular institution by the Lord." Now, why do I raise up these examples? Why do I bring this up? I'm not giving the typical, Jerome said it, therefore it's real. I think his testimony coheres very well with the historical evidence we do have, and he may well be relying on evidence we don't have. That's speculative, but it's very possible because the fact is many ancient works are lost that were otherwise present back then. Point being, Heschmeyer claims that this is totally unprecedented. It's totally unprecedented for a church to just choose its order in history. Well, according to Jerome, that's flatly false. Even if Jerome is wrong, they know what I'm saying. Even if Jerome is wrong, the idea of a church changing its order, its structure on very good pragmatic grounds is definitely not unheard of. In fact, he's totally fine with it. So that argument from silence, that counter argument from silence is laughable because it's not even a silence, it's flatly false. There is a direct example right here of someone, a prominent biblical scholar, highly respected throughout the Christian world, who totally granted that the church widely changed its structure for pragmatic purposes and explicitly says that it wasn't by an institution of the Lord. It's, oh my word, that is that is not silence, mate. That's not a silence. That's a very, oh my gosh, worst example you could get for silence. I mean, of all the silences that Catholics can appeal to, there are silences, some of them quite effective even. Of all of the ones to pick, you pick one that is just straight up false, mate. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, interesting comment. When the Protestant starts looking up Jerome, that's when you know things are going to get real. Oh yeah. I really want to get more into the works of Jerome. My particular focus of early church fathers is like the scholars. So that would be like Eusebius, Origen, Jerome. I'm really interested in what they say because they're the ones who kind of like gather the evidence around them and give explications. I think they're huge witnesses. So that's why I particularly like them. Yeah. But yeah, that's not a silence, bro. That silence is false. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Jerome would disagree with you.
If you went into a Baptist church and said, from now on, I'm the sole leader of this church.
Pay attention. Pay attention to how they categorize what they assume that non-mono-episcopal Protestants are asserting. Look at how they categorize the situation that they think Protestants are asserting.
If you went into a Baptist church and said, from now on, I'm the sole leader of this church, people are going to have something to say about that.
Right.
Or, you say, well, this was, this nice Roman democracy, I'm going to replace it with a single Caesar. People are going to have something to say, pro or con, or just observing the change. There's zero evidence of the change.
Right. Yes, there is.
Really remarkable.
Yes, there is. We have explicit testimony that Ephesus and Corinth were governed by multiple bishops within the first century. That is false. Absolutely false. Not to mention generic statements by Clement, the Didache, and the New Testament, denoting the assumption that there are multiple bishops over a single church. That's false. That is flatly false.
Remarkable lack of evidence. That they're literally arguing from no evidence that a massive revolution happened. It's like, oh, we don't have any evidence of this 5-year period in French history. They must have gotten rid of the government and installed a dictatorship. Like, that'd be an insane conclusion to go to from the silence.
So that's what we're arguing for, that these critics, including some Catholic scholars, will argue, well, what happened in the early church was that it was originally a council of elders. Some will say a council of elders. Some will just say it was just straight more Protestants that are not as scholarly. It was just democratized household churches. Others say, well, there were councils of
democracy is cringe, like if you agree,
but not single bishops. That arose much later. Well, then there had to be a change. Everyone's like, go to church. Who's this bishop? What, we have a bishop? What's going on now? It's like, oh, well, eventually there would be this massive disruption. You would think there would be people who would be for and against this, and it would be a source of controversy. But we can say, well, no, it doesn't. There is no evidence of that controversy. And we can take the critics' own argument from silence to say that shows there was no controversy. Right. There was a single leadership structure prevailing in the church during this time period.
Leon Morris, in the Evangelical Dictionary of Theology, makes just this argument. He says, nowhere is there evidence of a violent struggle, as would be natural, if a divinely ordained Congregationalism or Presbyterianism were overthrown. Because that's an important point. Like, if the apostles set this structure up and you, just some random guy, came along and scrapped it, wouldn't one or two faithful Christians, not just the normal politics of the thing of like, I was leading and you usurped my power, but like you usurped Jesus.
Look at the strife that took place at the end of the 2nd century over the Quarto Deciman controversy.
Yeah.
Okay. Notice how they characterize this. They characterize the Protestant position as some guy just walked into a church and started a revolution that people would have opposed. No, it's not. That's not what we're saying. By Jerome's own testimony, he gives an explanation that doesn't require that at all. That the lack of a controversy therefore means a change didn't happen. That there is no reason to grant that. Why should we grant that if the churches change their structure in a significant way that there would necessarily be controversy? If we go for Jerome's explanation that it was done in response to heresy, then why expect that? The churches would definitely be all on board with that. That's a fallacy of the excluded middle par excellence. This is a perfect example. If you want to know what a fallacy of the excluded middle is, this is it. When you provide either this option or this option and ignore a middle option or multiple middle options. In this case, you either have a violent revolution of the early church that radically changed the structure, and there must have been controversy and all that, or the monepiscopacy is original to the apostles in Christ. No, they do not consider the middle option, that this was a peaceable transition done by the consensus of church leaders in response to heresy, as is Jerome's own claim. Not to mention that, oh my word, they're even being inconsistent with their own arguments here. They talk about how, oh look, there's silence. Look, you can't make so many big arguments from silence in this early part of the period because before like the 3rd and 4th century, works had to be much shorter and pithy. They couldn't mention everything else. They couldn't mention everything that could be. And then of course I would also add, the scale of persecution, of course, and also bloody hell, I just lost it. The number of works from those early centuries, let alone even later centuries, that are lost to this day that may have mentioned these things and yet they're absent. So they say that an argument from silence on a bishop in Rome doesn't work because so much stuff, because there's simply not many works to go by, and it might have just passed over even if it did exist. And then I would add that it's because there's lost works as well. And yet an argument from silence here about any controversy from the transition, oh, no, that's a totally valid argument from silence, despite the fact that they only had so much space to write, only had so much time to write, and only so many sources from that period did survive. Bro, come on, this is total inconsistency. Absolute blatant inconsistency. It's, oh man, so this is why you really got to look out for it. You really got to look out for it. The Catholic apologetics on multiple topics has to contradict itself. Either the argument from silence is not okay, so you can't say that there wasn't a single bishop in Rome because you can't say that silence proves this, or the argument from silence is okay because there's no evidence of an early strife, which is apparently necessary if there was a change in church structure, a total non sequitur. There is no reason to believe that, given Jerome's own theory for how the transition occurred. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Far out. Okay, a couple of people mentioned the Shepherd of Hermas here. Doesn't the Shepherd of Hermas explicitly state presbyters presides over the Church of Rome? And John Bugay, good to see you, mate. Don't forget Hermas several times talking about multiple leaders, the churches in Rome fighting among themselves. Now, I do know of that, but I remember seeing elsewhere that there's either another statement in Hermas which actually counteracts that and shows that there was a single bishop, or it's just that there's the Muratorian fragment. It's debated whether it's late second or into the 4th century, but I believe the evidence is best that it is 2nd century. It specifically mentions the Shepherd of Hermas and that it was written while Hermas's brother Pius, quote, held the episcopacy in Rome. Now, this is obviously taken to say, oh, look, there's a monarchical bishop in Rome, therefore the Shepherd of Hermas isn't proof of a singular bishop, of a plural episcopacy, because the evidence referring to that same time shows that there was one bishop in Rome. But it is very much possible that it's simply referring to one bishop of multiple, not that he was the only bishop. So it might be saying that fragment, the Muratorian fragment, that the Shepherd of Hermas, because it was saying that the Shepherd of Hermas was written while Hermas's brother held the episcopacy in Rome. So it could be akin to saying, for example, I did this while my brother was teacher, held the teacher's office, held the teaching role at at a school or whatever. It may not be saying that he's the only bishop in Rome, only that to establish a time frame, it happened while Pius, the brother of Hermas, was bishop or a bishop in Rome, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's other things in the text which make it more explicit that it is a single bishop in there, but it can be, I believe, as far as I remember, it can be interpreted that way. But yeah, that's the key evidence against Hermas being a representative of evidence of multiple bishops in Rome. Let's solve this right now. Why not? Let's Shepherd of Hermas, multiple bishops in Rome. I'm trying to, because I remember seeing Catholic apologetic arguments. Shepherd of Hermas. Okay, no, you know what? Muratorian fragment. Muratorian fragment text. Let's look at that. I'm just pulling it up here on this other window. I'll give it to you guys in just a second. Okay. So this is from the Donald Robertson translation of the. Whoops. Let me go back to StreamYard of the Muratorian fragment. Hermas. Okay. And this is the evidence, by the way, that it was actually written, the fragment, in the early to or mid to late 2nd century, because it says Hermas wrote very recently in our times in the city of Rome. Okay, we receive also the pastor, or the Shepherd of Hermas, the book. Moreover, did Hermas write very recently in our times in the city of Rome, while his brother Bishop Pius sat in the chair of the Church of Rome. So, okay, so that wording makes it more explicit by the looks of it, that this is a single thing, that this is a singular episcopacy. So it would be interesting at trying to square that. Let's not forget as well that translations often do gloss a bit. So I really would like to see the original Greek of this. So, but yeah, point being, I've had this in mind. I've known of this. That's why I haven't appealed to the Shepherd of Hermas, because I haven't studied the alleged, because I haven't looked more deeply at this fragment yet, because this fragment does appear to say that there was a single bishop in Rome at the time of the Shepherd of Hermas, although it may be possible as well to interpret this as simply a chairman of the board situation, where he's considered a chairman bishop, but nonetheless one bishop among many. That may be compatible as well. But yeah, that's why I haven't appealed to the Shepherd of Hermas just yet. I'll study it a bit more, and I'll see where I go with it. But yes, to finish off, there's only a few minutes left.
Yes, that is the controversy about when to celebrate Passover. Do we use the Jewish lunar calendar, or do we celebrate it according to the liturgical calendar, and so it always falls on a Sunday? And that was a huge deal, right?
My documentary from some months ago on the Quartodeciman controversy and my discussion with Craig on it yesterday are literally the best breakdowns you can get on that issue, on that event, anywhere. I will not even pretend to not brag. Yes, it is the best stuff you can get there. Craig himself says it. So go watch those.
Pope Victor tried to make it uniform, and people trying to celebrate it. The dispute and disagreement between the two camps. Yeah, and that's just over the dating of a liturgical feast.
And one that there has clearly been a diversity in. They knew about the second century Christians knew that the church was established by Philip and John, went by the Jewish calendar. The other 10 apostles' churches,
checkmate, Greg,
went by the Roman calendar.
People knew about this dispute for a long time. And yet we're supposed to believe there would have been a heavily disputed change from congregational worship or from a council of priests to a bishop, and yet there's no record of anyone talking about this change ever.
And if they did feel free to change,
but that's a silence. They might not have just written about it because writing space was limited. They had only so many words to say, and many of our sources were missing. Consistency, folks.
Structures. It's really remarkable that the hundreds of churches for which
and again, doesn't need to be a controversy for there to have been a change. There is no reason to assert that, if Jerome's theory is true, that this was a consensual change within the churches in order to counteract heresy. Many changes have gone about without any controversy. Like, for example, a small change, but a change nonetheless, from using the word presbyteros to hierus when referring to, if we're granting the originality of priests, okay, which I don't, but let's say that priests are original to the church and that they were originally called presbyters. They were originally called presbyters, but then later on they started to be called more directly hierus or hieris in plural. That's a change. Where's the controversy of that change of what to call the priests? Because that change of words isn't insignificant. That's not an insignificant change. Hierus is more directly, literally a priest, whereas presbyter is at best like a word that it can be coupled with that concept. Where's the controversy of that change? Nothing. Doesn't mean the change didn't happen. If we have sufficient evidence, apostolic fathers, Acts, 1 Timothy and Philippians, then yes, we can say a change happened. Why there's no controversy, we can debate that. Doesn't matter. Fact is, change did happen.
We have records of by the early 3rd century, by the early 200s.
Yeah.
All of them have the exact same structure.
Right.
Isn't that weird? Like, every
in response to heresy,
the ability to choose its own system of governance. They don't all have the same one. That's kind of weird. That's more or less what you would expect. But imagine if they all had identical structures. That would make you think.
Who said they were identical structures? I mean, the tiers of hierarchy in an individual church isn't the only way there can be structural difference. There can be, for example, qualifications, exact qualifications and requirements for those to become a deacon or a bishop. How many bishops and deacons we have? What are their exact responsibilities among a myriad of other things? Those are nowhere near like how to even proceed with administration of the church, for example. What do we do in our meetings? How do we officiate meetings? So many different things that pertain to ecclesiastical structure beyond just the tiers. There may well have been differences, and I think there is clear evidence of that as well. Well, okay, there's definitely evidence of liturgical distinction, as with the Quarter Testament controversy. But who's to say that there wasn't diversity on other matters? Like the two tiers, the tiers thing is quite a basic thing. It's not exactly an issue if they don't have much diversity on that, especially if everyone recognizes that it's actually a good idea. So, yeah.
Maybe they don't feel free to pick and choose
Because they're receiving a leadership structure, a hierarchy.
Or because they know it is the best way to counteract heresy.
Sacred order and Greek hierarchy. That is part of the deposit of faith itself that was given by the apostles.
And Pope Clement, tying this back to the start of the conversation,
Right.
96, describes this as something that they received from the apostles. In other words, he explicitly disclaims the idea this is something they invent or create or adapt.
Oh my word. Yes, they received the institutions of overseers and deacons from the apostles. 2 orders, and there were multiple of them in Corinth. And Clement does not dispute this. In fact, he said it's a bad thing to overthrow your presbyters, to overthrow your overseers, your multiple overseers in the city of Corinth. Oh my word, equivocation up the wazoo here.
Right. But something they received. It's the same kind of way that Irenaeus and Heschmeyer talk about it later. The apostles established this and it comes down.
Right.
Not, we decided, we had a committee meeting, we decided this would be the best structure for our church. So these scholars are suggesting,
And that wouldn't matter with Clement anyway, because that is the time of a wide plural episcopacy. That wouldn't, the fact that he doesn't talk about a committee meeting of changing the structure, that's so flipping what? There's also the assumption that you must absolutely subscribe to whatever the basic structure of the apostles is, and they did not permit any, I don't know, let's say regional diversity in response to different circumstances and all that. Why grant that? That's just the silly Catholic authoritarian view of the church structure, that it must be this way, no divergence, even though there's nothing from the apostles saying, okay, maybe you guys can switch from plural bishops to single or the other way around. It's pretty pathetic, but whatever.
suggesting something that has no historical precedent prior to the Reformation and is totally detached from lived experience and reality. Like, it's an otherworldly kind of world they're describing, in which people just say, oh, okay, well, if you want to scrap the biblical church for a new one, we won't complain or write about it or notice it. We'll just go on our merry way. It's unreal.
What is the biblical church? Oh my word. Well, the biblical church is multiple episcopoi and deacons, 2 structures, 2 tiers. And that's what Clement received. Hey, that's what Clement received from the apostles. He explicitly said this is what the apostles did when they went preaching out in the towns and countries. They established 2 offices, and there's multiple of them in individual churches, like Corinth, for example. And the evidence is extremely strong that that's the case for Rome as well in the time of Clement. Oh, boy. So it's just the false requirement of like, oh, if you change the particulars of the structure, you're rejecting the biblical church. Like, why? Why is that the case? Why should we believe that? What is their evidence that, even granting the monepiscopacy, for example, or well, granting their assertion that if the apostles started with a plural episcopacy and then they went over to a monepiscopacy, why am I obligated to accept on top of that the apostles were adamant you must have multiple bishops and it cannot be a singular under any circumstance? Why should I believe that? Why should I grant that presupposition that makes a problem for my case? There is no reason for me to grant that. I could easily say that's the norm that the apostles established, that there's simply multiple overseers in the church, likely, in my opinion, because they simply appointed those who were already community heads in the communities they evangelized and made them overseers. And so simply by happenstance, there are multiple overseers. What evidence is there? Why should I accept that the apostles said there must be multiple bishops, there cannot be a singular bishop, and so making a change from multiple to singular bishops a problematic historical claim? Why should I accept that? Why should I accept that at all? That's ridiculous. It's stupid.
It's
Not calling you stupid. You guys are awesome. You guys are intelligent, but you're making really wild arguments here. Like borderline uncharitable, in my opinion.
very hard when you actually try to prove the emergent case,
Right.
to
Not at all.
find
Not at all.
any scrap of historical evidence that couldn't be better explained in the Catholic faith.
Bull.
Man, this is fun.
It's so fun to come back
It is
and
fun
just
to
hang
come
out. We're gonna have to bat this around a little bit more. Definitely have you back on the show soon. But
Ooh.
until we do that, I'm going to recommend. There's so much more we could have talked about, and a lot more of other related subjects. Your book, "The Early Church Was the Catholic Church." Where can people get a copy?
Yeah, it's on sale right now.
Okay, and I think that's more or less that. That's the. So yeah, you can see this video was good at the beginning when I said, because it pretty much gives a summarized, nice and well, it's in depth, but it is summarized somewhat. Case of monepiscopacy and how Roman Catholics respond to other arguments, and it's, as you can probably tell from my reactions and from what you've seen yourself, hopefully you can pick it up as well, or pick up on this stuff as well. Highly inconsistent and high reliance towards the end in particular on arguments from incredulity. Oh, the church would have been in controversy, but it didn't happen here, so surely it mustn't have happened, which is just based on absolutely unfounded assumptions. Lots of inconsistency, lots of ignoring of the evidence we do have and not addressing it. They barely touched First Clement. They didn't even attempt to come up with a coherent picture from the New Testament with which to reckon. And they didn't even mention the Didache once. So again, this is with respect to monepiscopacy and the 3-tier hierarchy of the church, two distinct claims, but highly interrelated, given the Catholic system as well. It just doesn't work. Their case is full of holes, full of fallacies, and they're not doing what the historian ought to do, and just get all the evidence, gather all the evidence, and provide an explanation that accounts for all this evidence. That's what you do. That's what a good history does. That's what a good historian does. And they simply failed at that task. I think this has been another good case study on the issues with typical Catholic apologetics. So I'm going to look at some more comments that I haven't looked at just yet. And if people have questions, by all means, please send them. I'm planning to use them against them. To finish up soon. But yeah, if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to do it. I think false dilemma fallacy. I think excluded middle is different. I always thought they were. I thought they were the same thing. I don't know. Maybe they're not. But yeah, it would be a false dilemma. That's what I'd call it as well. Hi, Canadian in the house. I guess he isn't a trucker. A lot of modern apologists go with Newman in this topic. Yeah, when they're more honest about the evidence, they just slap some Newman on it and call it a day. There's also a notable anti-pope named Natalius in the late 2nd century, which there is only one account of existing. If the monepiscopacy was so big, you'd think there would be more than that. I'm not sure the kind of argument you're trying to make from here. So the existence of an anti-pope. Sorry. Sorry about that. We're back. Okay. I'm not sure what kind of argument you're making from here. But yeah, I've heard some speculate different apostles started off with different structures. Yeah, it makes sense. Maybe. Just to apply types of silence they used against them as well. Yeah. Elaborate on that argument you made. I'm not sure exactly what you're trying to say. If you can't establish the office of the papacy in the NT, then it's not apostolic. I unironically agree with that. Although it's not a simple argument. Presbyter system seems like a synagogue system. Maybe. I don't see the point on Catholic apologetics in a post-Vatican II world. Universalist. Inclusivism, technically. More Catholicity. Hey, bro, the consensus of the fathers doesn't matter, bro. It's the seed form, bro. Give me my seeds. My seed form that goes into the tree. To be deep into history is to cease to be Roman Catholic. It could be a bit more pithy. I put it at the preface of my book, which I'm writing, that to be deep in history is to break through the bedrock of the Tiber and the Bosphorus. It's kind of more stylistic wordings. Do you have an opinion on the words of Henry Chadwick? I do not. I don't think I've read him. A little bit of history makes someone a Roman Catholic. A lot of history makes someone no longer a Roman Catholic. I agree. I always hear the instrumental rock music in the first day. I'm thinking of Newman now. Oh man, that's funny. I meant more than that in terms of accounts of Natalius's existence, not on more anti-popes for clarification. And it was simply to apply their line of logic that a lack of documents is a lack of proof. Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, it depends on what timestamp you're responding to them. Are you responding to them in the earlier timestamp when arguments from silence are bad, and so they would and so they would disagree with this, or are you talking about them later on in the same presentation when they would agree with this? So it's a bit ironic. But yeah, I think that's all we got for now. I think this brief quote unquote response has gone on for long enough. Yeah, I've gone through everything I need. And and so before people start heading off, let me do some final plugs. Do subscribe to my channel if you haven't already yet. Do like this video. Do share it to other people if you think they can benefit from it. Join my Discord server as well below in the description, the Theocrat Lounge, if you are a fellow believer. Or if you're an unbeliever, but if you're on good terms with me, message me and I will consider putting you in the server under the rank of heathen, I believe. Is that the rank I use for non-Christians? Particularly you, Alex. If you want to join the server, by all means, hit me up and I'll give you that special rank. Because it doesn't give you different permissions or anything. It just recognizes who's believers and who are not. And also, if you believe in my ministry, you want to get some nice perks like personal research notes that I make as I am doing my research and my study for things, even voting rights for future content, which I'm about to start up again. Early announcements as well as your ability to give me input and feedback on things early in production and on those early announcements, then do please consider becoming a patron below. And I'm considering adding other benefits on top of those as well eventually. There are multiple patron tiers. I really do encourage you, if you are financially stable and you are tithing to your local church, that you can become a patron, and that will be recognized in the Discord server as well. And of course, you get shouted out in videos, structured videos, edited videos. Or if you want to give a one-time donation, you can donate to my paypal.me. I would highly appreciate it because I do want to make this, especially for patrons, if you're considering that, I want to really make this a job so I can make stuff full-time or at least part-time, high quality, in order to edify the Christian world, to edify the body of Christ, give us good ammunition in our mission of the gospel. And also, I have merch coming up. That's right. I am currently making a few designs. I've got a few designs up right now for merch, but I haven't launched the store just yet. I want to have maybe at least 5 different items for merch. And once those are up, I'm going to launch the store and you'll be able to go for that and get some really based merch. It's not branded stuff like, oh, look, the other Paul on a t-shirt. Like, I'm not a band, okay? I'm not someone you wear around and people are going to recognize me. The vast majority of people are like, who the hell's the other Paul? Why do you have that on your shirt? It's going to be stuff that's actually meaningful for people to wear. I've got some really base designs, some of them done already. And so once I've got a few more of those, that store for merch will be launched and you'll be able to get some really awesome merch to wear around and do some subtle evangelism. Anyway, thank you all very much. Oh, yes, Andrew, follow me on my alternatives in particular. I've got Facebook as well, got on Twitter, links below. But in particular, follow my alternatives like Gab. Gab is going to be the future central hub of the other Paul once I'm inevitably nuked from the mainstream platforms. And BitChute and Odyssey as well, although BitChute, I admit, I don't really maintain that much. So, but Odyssey automatically gets my YouTube videos, at least most of them. I think longer ones it might not, and puts them up on the Odyssey page. So do follow me there as well, should I get nuked from YouTube one day. And yes, that is all for now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining today's stream. It has been fantastic. I hope you learned a thing or two from it, even if you are a Roman Catholic. I believe this kind of stuff advances debates. And I hope you have a blessed day, especially if you're on my side of the planet and it's the Lord's Day. Have a happy, blessed Lord's Day. Have a great evening. God bless.